Is Resident Evil Death Island worth watching? Is it worth a buy? That's what we're going to be discussing in today's video. Now, if this is your first time watching one of my reviews, the way I do things is we first do spoiler free, then we go into spoiler territory. I'll make sure to let you guys know where we'll discuss things that I loved in detail about the movie. Then we'll go over to the other section, which is minor nitpicks that I had with the movie. And then after, we'll go into the final review score that I gave to the movie. So for starters, the first thing that I actually want to go over is how fast-paced Resident Evil Death Island is. You know, compared to the other CGI movie slash, shows, with Infinite Darkness as well being the last and previous CGI movie, one of the things I really appreciated about Resident Evil Death Island, without getting into spoilers or details, is that it was very cohesive. It was a very packaged deal, as opposed to the other CGI movies and shows where in those ones, it was kind of like an up and down kind of a roller coaster. You would kind of start with action or, start with the plot, then, there'd be ups and downs with the action, then it would kind of descend into more story related or kind of filler content. And then after it would actually come back up, with the final boss, you'd have all those, awesome, impressive moments for the previous movies and shows. But that's definitely not the case with Resident Evil Death Island. One of the things that I really liked about it is that obviously the story did have, moments where it kind of just, there was like a breather moments, right? There was little breaths in the story, but everything was just very cohesive, very action-packed, very fast-paced. One of the things that I honestly really loved about the movie, without getting into detail, was the fact that we got to see all of our characters again. We got to see them interacting with each other. I will go more into detail into the actual aspects of what I really liked about the film later on in this video. But yeah, all in all, I thought it was a great experience. I highly recommend watching Resident Evil Death Island movie. And to be honest, I think this might be my favorite Resident Evil, CGI slash show. I mean, we only had one show. I keep saying that. So I'll just, from now on, I'll just say movies. But as mentioned, the other movies, they were good at times. But you know what? My overall feelings with the previous Resident Evil movies was they were kind of mid, especially moments like in the previous Resident Evil films where it was just, it was too much. It was too much talking, not much really going on, kind of too much feelings. This movie had those, but they kept it very quick. So, if you liked fast-paced, action-packed kind of a movie, this is pretty good. Now, I'm not going to say that this is the best movie ever. This is obviously a Resident Evil movie, and I thought that, they kept the Resident Evil formula there. Obviously, we are going to be talking about the minor nitpicks later on in the video with stuff that I had issues with, but again, they're all just minor nitpicks. All in all, I thought that this movie was a solid movie, and I highly recommend that you go out and watch it. I would actually wait for a sale if you don't live in America, because here in Canada, the movie is actually $40. So that's a big, that's a lot of money for a brand new movie. I actually thought it was kind of weird. If anything, it almost seems like, the reason the price is so high outside of the US is probably because, we didn't get it in theaters. So I think the production companies, they wanted to, make their money. So they basically just brought the price up. And as I stated in several videos, I thought it was kind of a shame that we didn't get this movie in theaters. I would have loved to have watched it on the big screen. I always like going to movie theaters to watch Resident Evil, even if the movie isn't that great. It's a good experience, as an RE fan. So that it's kind of a bummer, but again, I think that's why they brought the price up. So I would actually definitely wait for a sale. And there's also talks of the movie actually coming to Netflix. So if that happens, I would actually wait it out just a little more if you haven't watched it. All right, so now let's move on to the spoilery section of the review. If you guys have not watched the movie and don't want to hear, you can get out of the video, go watch the movie, and then come back to watch my full thoughts on the whole thing. But you know what? Now we're going to get into real details. So let's get started with the first section, which is things that I loved about Resident Evil Death Island. So one of the first things that I actually really loved about Resident Evil Death Island was the fact that they talked about Jill's backstory. This is something that I went over in my 5 things that Resident Evil Death Island should do video. And to be honest, I was actually really happy that they did this. They referenced Resident Evil 5. They reference what Jill went through with Wesker and how she's basically still, going through that. There's trauma there and she's still being affected by that, which, what is a very normal thing. And if anything, I would actually go as far as to say that the whole theme for the movie was basically about trauma. The message of the movie at the end of the day was, if you don't deal with trauma, you leave it unchecked, it could have dire consequences, and that obviously can be seen with the villain who obviously, still had trauma all the way spanning from 1998 and throughout the whole year since that event of losing his best friend. He obviously, turned to the dark side, went a little crazy, just a little, and, he wanted to destroy the whole world. And the same thing can be said with Jill's character, obviously, and this is actually addressed right at the beginning of the movie when Chris and Jill are kind of speaking and how, Chris is like, you can't be so, so tough. Obviously, you know, you do have to let in humanity in. You know, you can't just be throwing yourself into the mission 100%. You know, you got to take care of yourself because, again, you could put other people's lives at risk. The whole message was interesting, and you know what, I thought they did a good job of explaining that. And as mentioned, I really like that they basically also gave us information regarding Jill, that since this movie takes place in 2015, you know, Jill has not been back with the BSAA since the events of Resident Evil 5. So, you know, since 2009, obviously. So it's been 6 years since Jill has been back in action, essentially. And I also really liked the detail of, you know, like especially at the beginning of the movie when Jill is going through the house, you know, and she's kind of going around. I also thought it was interesting that they also added that detail with the flashlights, you know, when Jill was walking through the whole, you know, house. And it was very reminiscent to the director's previous show, which was Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. To this day, I don't quite understand what the whole clicking of the light thing is. Is the reason why they're clicking off their flashlight so that enemies that might be in the house don't recognize them or see exactly where their position is? That's a little, you know, iffy. I still to this day don't know, but of course it might be a military tactic. But regardless, it was cool to see that detail kind of be brought back. Going back to what I was saying, as Jill's going through the house, she kept losing her gun, right? She loses her gun, you know, and so she has to, you know, go to hand-to-hand combat. You know, this obviously happened as well once she entered Alcatraz. You know, same thing kind of occurred. She kind of lost her gun, you know, again. So she's sloppy, but the reason she's sloppy is obviously because she hasn't been back in 6 years. So, you know, anybody's going to be rusty at that point, right? Well, compared to the other characters, you know, they've been doing this for quite some time and they haven't stopped. So I thought that was a very interesting detail. I really liked that and I appreciated that. I also have to mention too that I honestly really liked, you know, the first time that I saw Chris enter the room after Jill has like her fight with the zombie, you know, and all the BSAA members kind of show up. I really appreciated, and it did bring a smile to my face seeing Chris kind of talking with Jill again, even though Jill was actually acting really cold and stuff. But again, that's what trauma does. So that, you know, that didn't really bother me, but just them, you know, seeing the whole crew and not just with Chris and Jill, but also when the whole team was kind of talking to each other, it did make me really happy as a fan because again, that's never really happened. You know, there's so many instances where in the movies where we haven't seen characters, you know, interact with each other, especially when it comes to characters like Jill interacting with Leon or Rebecca interacting with Hunnigan. You know what I mean? Those are all things that as a fan of the series, you know, was really cool to see, and it did, you know, bring a smile to my face. The other really cool detail that I honestly really liked was the fact that Chris, when he was speaking with Jill, you know, in the gun range, it was really nice that he brought up Piers. Now, Piers, you know, obviously died in 2013 in Resident Evil 6, you know, during China, you know, the China incident. It was very cool to see that, you know, Chris was bringing that up in Jill's conversation, you know, kind of talking about trauma and stuff and how, you know, he lost all his men. But I really appreciated, you know, that they mentioned that. At the end of the day, it does make sense that Chris would mention that since, again, this movie takes place in 2015 and Piers died 2 years prior to the events of Death Island. So again, really nice detail, really appreciated that. Now, the other thing that I have to talk about that I really liked about the movie was the fact that they added several scenes. You know, there were several scenes as soon as you meet Dylan, you know, the villain of the movie. There are several scenes where Dylan, you can see that he's very suicidal. Obviously, he's not mentally well. You know, he's completely, you know, he's lost his marbles. He's crazy. And the thing that I liked was that he kept playing Russian roulette with himself. You know, he kept pulling the gun in his head, even though he's about to, you know, go out with his plan, execute his whole plan to basically infect the whole entire world. You know, he keeps having moments where he just puts the gun to his head. And I really appreciated those moments because, you know what, it kind of shows that he's not that crazy. Obviously, you know what I mean? Like, you know, with all his craziness, there is some sort of humanity in him where he's like, you know what, if I'm really doing something bad, then I'll leave it up to the universe. I'll leave it up to fate to decide, you know, if I'm doing something really bad that I shouldn't be doing, then tell me, you know what, I'll kill myself right now. And that kind of, you know, perspective with somebody that's, you know, as crazy as Dylan was also really interesting to see. You know what I mean? I appreciated that, especially just because of his perspective, right? His whole paradigm is, you know, about fate. So, you know what I mean? So he believes in that. And it was cool to see that, you know, they added so much, you know, character to Dylan. So I really appreciated that. That was actually really cool for the story's sake. You know what I mean? That they added those kinds of scenes where, you know, he's like, wait a second, you know, it's almost like he's checking himself, kind of like, you know what, if I am crazy, then you know what, I should die right now. So I'll just leave it up to, you know, the universe or fate or whatever to decide if I should die. And the fact that he wouldn't die also was kind of confirmation to his craziness. You know, if anything, it kind of just confirmed to Dylan that, you know what, if the universe doesn't want to kill me or fate doesn't want to kill me, then that means that I'm going in the right way. You know what I mean? So that kind of craziness, you know what I mean, that kind of craziness into the character was really appreciated. Now, the other cool thing that I also have to mention is Jill and Leon finally meeting, you know, on the big screen. Now, obviously, it's not their first time meeting since, you know, as soon as they saw each other, they recognized each other. So they've obviously met before. So it wasn't a first time introduction, but just seeing those two kind of interacting with each other was really amazing. You know, one of the things that I really loved too was when Jill asks for a gun, you know, Leon literally passes her a gun. But the way he passes her the gun was very Leon-esque since, you know, again, we're going back to Resident Evil 6's Leon, where he would kind of twirl his guns, you know, the wing shooters, he would kind of twirl them. So the fact that he kind of just twirled it and then passed it to Jill, that was a really cool detail that I honestly really loved, and I really appreciated that as well. The other thing also I have to mention about that scene in particular was, I don't know who the stunt guys were that played, you know, Jill and Leon in that scene, especially when all of like the Lickers variations were kind of attacking them, but those stunt guys were really in sync. A huge shout out to the people that were doing the stunt work for that, because I don't think it was the actors, you know, though the people that did that specific scene, it did seem way more fluid. You know, I really liked how they kind of complemented each other. Like, for example, if Leon was shooting on the ground, or was it Jill, you know, they kind of get back up in a fluid motion, go back, running, shoot back. The whole thing was very rehearsed. But, you know, if we're talking about these two characters that are obviously professionals in what they do, you know, we're not going to have, you know, sloppy movements. And throughout the whole movie, you know, going back to that point that I made about Jill, I also really like that Jill kept getting better and better because, you know, she's practicing, obviously. You know, she's, you know, she was rusty at the start of the movie, but as the movie progresses, she's getting back to her old, you know, she's getting back in shape, essentially, you know what I mean? So seeing Leon and Jill's kind of fight scene, fighting, you know, together against the Lickers was really great. I really love that scene, really love the choreography. It's very fluid. It looks like, you know, Jill and Leon obviously knew how you know, how they both operate. It was nice to see that both of the characters were very in sync. Now, moving on to the last thing that I really loved about this movie was the section where, you know, all of the heroes are there and they're kind of speaking with Dylan. You know, I really liked how Dylan, you know, he was dissing everybody. But when it came to Chris, wow, man, that guy knows how to throw shade, man. He threw like the biggest shade at Chris Redfield, you know, by stating, he states, I'm paraphrasing obviously, but he states somewhere, you know, something like, you know, Chris, every time he goes into a mission, all of his men die. And it's like, dude, like, Chris just, you know, speaking of trauma, Chris kind of just got over that, you know, after the death of Piers, just 2 years prior to the Resident Evil Death Island. You know, that was the last time that it happened to him. And, you know, he was kind of just fighting through that throughout the whole game of Resident Evil 6. So to bring you know, to attack Chris like that, like, I was like, dang, all right, Dylan, you know, like, you need to calm down, man, because that was honestly super hilarious. I completely laughed when I watched that scene. I was like, dude, that's a little much, man. You need to calm down, you know. Dylan, stop. Okay, so I was editing this video and then I realized, bro, I forgot to mention something that I really loved about this movie, and I can't believe I forgot. But this is something that I actually spoke, I had a whole conversation with a viewer a couple months ago on my breakdown video of Resident Evil Death Island, and we basically discussed how it would be so awesome if Matthew Mercer came back to portray Leon. So that was actually something that I wanted to talk about in this video. I've been prepping for that, and I can't believe I forgot to talk about that because, of course, Matthew Mercer did return, which was honestly a huge surprise. I just assumed that we were just going to get Nick Apostolidis again, since obviously he took the role in Infinite Darkness, which takes place 2 years after the events of RE4. And then Resident Evil 4, Nick Apostolidis did a fantastic job of making Leon sound a bit older, you know what I mean? You know, more mature, more experienced, kind of a Leon. But yeah, so when I first heard that Matthew Mercer was coming back to the role, I'll be honest, I was super shocked, super surprised, and I can't believe that one of my favorite Leon came back to voice Leon again in Death Island. You know, to be honest, that was something that I honestly really loved about this movie, was seeing him again. You know what I mean? Seeing Matthew Mercer portray Leon, because you know what? Yeah, like as mentioned, like, this is just a personal preference, but Matthew Mercer, man, he's my Leon, man. He's my favorite Leon. You know, Nick Nikopos, don't get me wrong though, Nikopos Elidis in Resident Evil 4, Resident Evil 4 Remake, he did, get up there, like a number 2 spot. But again, this is just a personal preference. But when I think of Leon, I always think of Matthew Mercer. So that was something that I forgot to mention, but I thought I would. Anyways, let's get back to the video. So anyways, those are all of the things that I loved about Resident Evil Death Island. Let's move on to the minor nitpick section, and then we'll go with the final review score. So for the first minor nitpick that I actually had was, there was a scene right when, Chris, Claire, and Jill all go into the jail cells, location in Alcatraz. There was this scene where everybody was fighting and stuff, and there was a really awkward scene where we see the actor portraying Chris kind of climbing the rails. And I thought that was, at first I thought it was really funny how he was kind of just, lifting the other chick with one arm, shooting a zombie and whatnot. One of the things that I thought was kind of weird was Chris going on the rails and kind of climbing up. It seemed very unnatural. It almost seemed like, if I'm being honest, it almost seemed like the mocap stage where they shot that specific scene was just set on the ground. And so he had to lower himself a little more and then kind of go up. I don't know. The whole scene he moved up there like a really old guy, you know what I mean? So again, it is worth mentioning that's just a minor nitpick, but yeah, I thought that the animation there was a bit strange and that could have been polished a little more in my opinion. Now, the other minor nitpick that I had has to do with the story, especially when it comes to Dylan, that whole scene where he's talking to Chris, Claire, Jill, and Leon, and all of them are basically infected except for Jill. One of the things that I didn't understand was, why did the infection rate take such a long time with our heroes? Why did it take everybody, Leon, Claire, Chris, why did it take them so long to get infected? Why didn't they get infected right away? That didn't really make any sense, especially since the whole movie, one of the things that the virus did was it infected people incredibly quick. So I thought that they should have explained something a little more. They probably should have explained, hey, wait a second, the tour guides that all got infected at the same time, they were infected before, but it doesn't work. Even if I'm trying to fix the story right now, it still doesn't work, mostly because that infection, the way it infected the people versus how it infected the heroes is still different. Leon, Claire, and Chris were getting incredibly pale. They look incredibly gaunt. They were losing energy like crazy fast. And that didn't happen to the tourists that were on the island. You know what I mean? Like when Chris, Jill, and Claire first enter Alcatraz and they're walking in the prison cell, there's a guy, full on energy shooting a little vlog of himself, of him, sleeping in the beds or whatever. And he's like, this is hot. This is like super uncomfortable. That guy was pumped with energy. And, as he's filming when the first outbreak occurs or whatever on the prison, he gets infected just like that. Like it's incredibly quick. So that made absolutely no sense. The characters, you know what I mean? Like the heroes, it took them longer to get infected, but for everybody else, it was instant. And that actually was part of the infection. So why did Dylan do that? You know what I mean? It was kind of like a cheesy, like James Bond kind of a moment, like, oh, you're, stay in my death trap, but I'm not going to watch you die. I'm just going to go out, and do other stuff. I'm just going to guarantee, I'm just going to leave it up to fate that you're going to die. You know what I mean? Like it didn't really make any sense. Now, another thing that I also had an issue with that specific scene was when Rebecca comes with the vaccines. When Rebecca came and she was about to give the vaccine, I thought it was strange that Claire wasn't the first one to get injected with the vaccine, because Claire was the one that got infected first. They actually mentioned this in the movie. Dylan's like, yeah, Claire's about to get infected at any second, and it makes sense because she got infected first. But how come when Rebecca came with the vaccines, Leon wasn't like, go inject Claire? She's in the prison cell, go get her. She needs the vaccine more than I do. I just got bitten, so I think I'm good. You know what I mean? Like he should have said, both Chris and Leon should have said that. So that was a weird thing that occurred in the movie that I was like, bro, what? But obviously, if, for those of you that watched the movie, you already know that the reason that they did that was so that they could have Leon kind of run off so he could fight Maria, which was kind of weird. You know what I mean? Like I still don't understand that whole scene. It's still weird. Claire should have gotten the vaccine first because she was the one that was dying. She was the one that was the closest to death's door. So also continuing on with what I was mentioning with Leon and Maria having their fight, that's another thing that I also had a minor nitpick with. For starters, I actually really like the fact that they basically said that, oh yeah, Leon's not up to his energy levels. His energy levels aren't at max at the moment because, you know, the vaccine still needs time to kick in. So he's feeling really bad, but obviously Leon went over there. That's great. I like that. I like that they explained that. And as Leon and Maria were basically fighting, you know, you could see right away that Leon was moving really slowly, you know, compared to his usual self. But then all of a sudden his energy comes back and then he starts, you know, I think he hits her like 3 times and then that's the end. That's the end of the fight. She literally gets stabbed with the thing and then she dies. And I was like, okay, like I would have liked it if the fight scene was a little longer. You know what I mean? Like if we got to see Leon kind of get his energy back up. Like as I was watching that as a viewer, I was like, wait a second. All right, now things, you know, now things are just getting started. You know what I mean? Like Leon's back in the fight, you know, he's gonna get ready. But then it just ended like abruptly. You know what I mean? Like, he just went wah, 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 and then she just fell in the little, you know, spike thing, the spiked metal thing, and then she just died. And I was like, okay. All right, then. I wanted more to that scene, but okay, I guess it's gonna have to do. So that was kind of a minor nitpick for me. I think that scene after Leon gets his energy levels back up should have lasted a little longer. You know what I mean? And maybe if they had cut a little bit of the scene before, you know, cut the fight time before he got his energy levels back up, would have been better in my opinion. Okay, so moving along with the next thing that I had an issue with was the fact that when the final boss moment occurs in the movie, you know, that's all fine. I don't really, you know, mind that. That's very standard Resident Evil. But my issue here was as soon as Dylan kind of transforms and kind of, you know, shows himself to everybody, literally the scene following that was Rebecca, Claire both pulling out rocket launchers from like, wait, hold up. Where'd you get those rocket launchers? Both Chris, you know, gets a rocket, I think, and also Claire gets like a huge, you know, assault rifle. And I was like, dude, like what's happening here? Like, where did you guys pull those weapons out? You know what I mean? So, you know what? I think they should have explained, you know, we should have had a scene before like, hey guys, you know, Dylan has a bunch of weapons over there. You know what I mean? Like there's a bunch of weapon caches, grab something, let's get started. You know what I mean? That scene needed to happen with that because that made absolutely no sense. Even if we look back into previous movies, like for example, Resident Evil Infinite Darkness kind of had the exact same scene because again, this is part of the Resident Evil formula where you get a big rocket launcher, you know, for the final boss at the end, you know, after he transforms, you know what I mean? So, but they actually explained it, you know what I mean? Like they had like an emergency rocket launcher kind of a thing. So Leon, you know, you have a scene there where Leon's like, oh, there's a rocket launcher here, you know what I mean? Now, I don't have an issue with, you know, there being a rocket launcher at the end there. My issue is that they didn't really explain to us where they got all those weapons. You know what I mean? Like it was just a given, like, oh yeah, final boss is here. Everybody, you know, pull that emergency rocket launcher. And I was like, bro, where'd you get that? So that was a weird thing that happened in the movie. And also it just kept getting more crazy. Like there was like, oh, there's this, you know, there's a rocket launcher. Oh, there's a plasma rifle. There's a futuristic plasma rifle that you can use. Of course, yeah. Everybody knows how to operate one of those. And, you know, you could say that Jill has used plasma rifles, especially with Resident Evil 3 Remake, you know, but again, that was an experimental weapon. So why did Dylan have that? You know what I mean? Like that's not something you could just go to your local weapon shop. I mean, I'm Canadian, so I don't know, right? But I know that plasma rifles don't exist. And I know that this is a Resident Evil world, so there are going to be weapons like that. But you know what I mean? Like that was a little too convenient. Like, okay, I get the rocket launchers, but now we're going with plasma rifles. And yeah, that was kind of weird. You know what I mean? Like it just kept progressing even to like more ludicrous, you know? So I was like, bro, you need to calm down here. And the other thing that also didn't really make much sense as to why Dylan had a full arsenal of rocket launchers and a whole bunch of weapons everywhere was the fact that Dylan's plan of attack, you know, his whole plan regarding, you know, world domination or world infecting the whole world, it had nothing to do with weapons. You know, he wasn't using nuclear weapons. He wasn't using, you know, machine guns. So I don't really understand why Dylan had like a whole arsenal of weapons of RPGs, you know, scientific plasma rifle weapons in his, you know, hangar if, you know, his whole plan was using biodrones. You know what I mean? So I don't really understand why he was packing, you know, essentially. So, you know, he was packing, you know, to like a crazy level. You know, like I can get that he obviously has taste, you know, he obviously likes guns since, you know, his whole gun had like, you know, whole engravings and stuff, his whole revolver. But you know what I mean? Like it was just weird. I didn't really get that. It didn't really make much sense. And again, I think that they should have added that kind of a scene where it was like, go and get Dylan's weapon cache. Look, there's a bunch of weapons in here. You know, guys, here's a rocket launcher, but they didn't explain that. So now another nitpick that I had as well was, and this was very James Bond-esque, was the fact that Dylan decided to make a secret lair, a secret base in Alcatraz. You know, that wasn't really explained well during the whole movie as to why Dylan chose that location, and also how much money did it cost to make a full underground hangar in Alcatraz. You know what I mean? Like, every time they get aerial shots of that island, it looks like it's incredibly small. So I'm like, how much digging did you do? Like, how much did this secret lair cost you to make, you know, in Alcatraz? Like, I don't understand how they had so much money to do all of this. Like, it was pretty wild, you know what I mean? So that was very James Bond, you know, kind of villain, but they didn't really do a good job of explaining why Alcatraz. Why did he build the whole secret location, especially when Leon and Jill are kind of going through the whole, you know, tunnels and stuff, and he opens up and they go into, you know what I mean? Like, they obviously spent, you know, a lot of money, and it's just, yeah, I to this day, I don't understand why Alcatraz. Now, the other thing that I also didn't really like was the fact that they didn't really go into detail as to telling the audience what the virus was. You know what I mean? Like, there was just one scene, correct me if I'm wrong, but like Rebecca kind of says, like, along the lines that, oh yeah, this is a combination of previous viruses that we've dealt with. You know, the only thing that we know for sure that's in this cocktail of viruses, of this new virus that's being, you know, mass produced or mass, you know, sent across the world with the biodrones, is that we know that it contains a T virus, but we don't really know much else as to the other types of viruses that are in this, you know, new cocktail of viruses. So I would have liked it if, you know, the filmmakers, you know, explained more as to what the virus was, you know what I mean? And that was a very weird thing that, you know, they didn't really touch upon, which I thought was very strange, because, you know, as a fan, I do want to know what virus this is. What cocktail of virus is this? You know what I mean? Like, don't just tell us that it's a cocktail, tell us what's in it. You know what I mean? Like, we know that there's T virus. I can obviously ascertain that it's probably has the A virus, but since it was so quick, you know, Rebecca made a vaccine instantly. You know, I would have liked it if we had a scene where Rebecca's like, oh yeah, this contains the T virus, this contains the, you know, the T phobos or the T abyss. You know what I mean? Like, it has a little bit of this, has a little bit of that, and it's just like a chimera of stuff. You know what I mean? So that was a wasted opportunity, in my opinion, and that was a minor nitpick that I had. That you know, they should have gone into more detail as to what the virus actually was, because I actually want to know as a fan. You know what I mean? Like, it's like, what, you know, the Lakers look very interesting. They kind of look like they were, you know, half T abyss. So I wanted to know more about that. And the other nitpick that I had with the movie was that it was, you know, as mentioned before, it's a very fast-paced, kind of cohesive story, which was nice, but the minor nitpick that I had is that it kind of ended very abruptly. Once you get to the final stages of the movie and you kind of see what's going on, like, you know, they stop Dylan, you know, they go up and they're just waiting, you know, for a boat to get out of Alcatraz. My bad, it was actually a helicopter, but once that happens, that's it. That's the end of the movie. You know what I mean? Like, the credits start rolling, and I thought maybe there was going to be something after, like, the initial credits, but no, there was nothing. You know what I mean? There was no post-credit scene. I guess my nitpick here is that I would have liked a scene where it was we kind of got some closure with Jill. You know what I mean? Like, we kind of, you know, because before, at the beginning of the movie, we kind of saw that Jill was going through trauma, and now that she's back in action, you know, she's not rusty anymore, especially after fighting Dylan. You know, all those moments, it kind of, we needed, I think, you know, to be honest, I felt like we needed to have a scene where Chris, Jill, and everybody, I don't know, goes to a restaurant or something, or starts talking, something to, like, just wrap everything up, have, you know, Jill kind of realize that, hey, I can't be so cold, and, like, I have to deal with this trauma so that I can move on. A scene that I was expecting to see at the end of the movie was like a scene kind of like the Avengers. You know what I mean? Like, at the end of the Avengers movie, they all go to, like, a shawarma place and they start eating. You know what I mean? Like, something crazy like that. But I thought it would have been nice to kind of just wrap things up with, especially with all the drama that was in the movie. You know what I mean? So that's my minor nitpick. I didn't like how it was just abruptly ended, and I thought there should have been a little more of a closing scene. Even Resident Evil Infinite Darkness, which again was directed by the same director as Resident Evil Death Island, he actually ended Resident Evil Infinite Darkness when he has a chat with Leon and Claire. You know what I mean? Like, he did that already, but I was really confused that that was not really the case with the end of Resident Evil Death Island. So those are all of my minor nitpicks. Let's go to my final review score for Resident Evil Death Island. You know what? As mentioned, I think that this one is the most cohesive, most fast-paced, you know, doesn't go up and down with energy levels. It's very, you know what I mean, like, very straightforward. You know, there's some breather moments, but, you know, all in all, the movie was very solid, especially when it comes to Resident Evil. You know, I am speaking in terms of Resident Evil, not in, you know, just movie terms, but, you know, if it was movie terms, I'd probably probably give this a 7.5, but since this is Resident Evil, I'll give it an 8, since as mentioned, this is probably the best CGI movie that we've had so far. Seeing the whole cast kind of interacting with each other was a really great thing. So for that reason, you know what, I'm gonna stick with giving Resident Evil Death Island an 8.0. So if you guys agree with my thoughts or you disagree, let me know your thoughts down below in the comment section. And if you guys enjoyed this review, make sure to check out these reviews, you know, where I basically review Resident Evil 4 Remake and Resident Evil Infinite Darkness. Anyways, thank you so much for watching.